never forget that moment. In a blink, my whole world flipped. There, inside a ring of gray ash from an abandoned fire, a tiny Doberman puppy, no more than 3 months old, was doing something I couldn't believe. It wasn't running. It wasn't afraid. It was stepping into the fire. I froze, eyes locked on the sight I couldn't accept. Those baby paws, soft and fragile, pressed straight onto the glowing coals. A thin curl of smoke rose at once, carrying the sickening scent of burned skin that turned my stomach. The pup cried out, a sharp, cutting sound that lodged itself in my chest. But what stole my breath wasn't the cry. It was the way it didn't pull back. It kept moving forward, as if pain was the only road left to freedom. It spun, gnawing at its own hind leg until blood showed, then staggered toward the heart of the ashes where embers still glowed. I saw the pads of its feet blister, its fur singe, but it pushed deeper as if searching for an ending. A baby dog, weak, breakable, was walking itself into destruction. My whole body trembled. I couldn't believe what my eyes were seeing. A choking sound rose in my throat. There was no time left to think. My work pack hit the ground with a dry thud. I shouted, voice cracking, "No! Stop!" But the puppy didn't hear. It just shivered, convulsing, eyes wide and cloudy with pain. Then it lifted another paw and stepped onto the burning ash. The sound that came out of it wasn't an ordinary whimper. It was a cry from something that had lost all hope, a blade of noise cutting straight into my ears. I lunged forward, each stride like stepping into my own nightmare. Dust exploded behind my boots. My heart pounded so hard I couldn't tell if it was the beat in my chest or the echo of my own scream. Seconds stretched into eternity. I reached it just as one more tiny foot touched the ash. A hiss rose, and the smell of scorched flesh filled the air. I grabbed it, lifted it out. Its body was weightless, trembling in violent spasms against my hands. And what panicked me more than the burns was its reaction. It wasn't trying to escape me. It wasn't looking for safety. It was straining to go back. It clawed, twisted its head, muscles tightening with a desperate pull toward the fire. My blood rushed hot and dizzy. I was holding a living being that didn't want to live. A puppy, only weeks old, is trying to end its own existence. The thought clamped my heart, cold as a hand closing around my throat. I didn't want to believe it, but I felt it as clear as daylight. This wasn't just a wounded animal. This was a broken soul. The whimper kept spilling from its throat, faint but haunting. The stench of burned paws wrapped around me, nauseating, inescapable. I held it tighter to my chest, my heart hammering as if it would tear through my ribs. Sweat ran down my back, dripping onto my shirt, mixing with the harsh smell of charred fur. In my head, I almost shouted, "What's happening? Why would a puppy want to destroy itself?" But I had no right to let that question slow me down. Every instinct screamed that if I hesitated one beat longer, it would be gone. And in that instant, I understood. I had stepped straight into a waking nightmare, and this tiny life was already sliding toward the edge. I had never run that fast in my life. My boots pounded the cracked earth, dust geysers trailing behind. My heart hammered like a drum, louder than the cicadas in the pines. With every step closer, the burnt smell grew thicker, so foul it made bile rise in my throat. When I reached it, a tiny paw had just landed on the red-hot ash. A sharp hiss ripped out, savage, awful. Then a low, pitiful moan. I scooped it up. It was feather light, a bundle of trembling. The heat from those burned pads seared through to my palms, a sting that made my skin ache. But what shook me more wasn't the burn. It was what the pup did next. It didn't struggle to get away from me. It didn't search for shelter. Every ounce of whatever strength remained in that body bent toward the ashes. its head twisted, claws raked at empty air, the little frame arching as if to fling itself back into the pain. I couldn't believe it. I was holding something so small, and all it wanted was to return to the fire. I cried out, my voice tearing, "Why? Why are you doing this?" But even as the words left me, I knew they were useless. It wouldn't understand human questions, nor did it need to. What remained in it was a warped instinct, warped by a despair far larger than its fragile body. I pressed it to my chest, feeling the frantic, uneven breaths, like a busted horn. Its whole body shuddered, a continuous tremor not of cold but of absolute terror. I felt like I was cradling a shattered heart, still beating, but beating only to remind me it wanted to stop. I stood there on the empty dirt road, dusk folding in from the trees, and realized I'd been thrown into a fight I hadn't prepared for. A Doberman puppy, no older than 3 months, had lost the will to survive. Rather than flee pain, it sought it. Rather than avoid the heat, it rushed into it. That terrified me more than anything I'd ever faced. A monstrous thought slithered through my mind. It wants to die. The idea crawled into my head like a venomous snake. I wanted to dismiss it, to believe this was a momentary panic, but looking at it, those glassy, tear-dulled eyes, I knew something inside was broken. A puppy can't speak, but it was screaming in the only language it had left. Come to the end. I staggered a few steps, trying to hold it tighter. Its small claws battered my chest, leaving hot, stinging scratches. Still, I wouldn't let go. I knew if I set it down, it would fling itself into the hot ash again, and this time might not rise. The air around us felt thick as syrup. The last light of sunset bled the world into the color of fresh blood. I looked down and saw its eyes wide open, reflecting not the sun but an abyss. For the first time in years, a primal fear took hold of me. The fear that I couldn't save a tiny life that was trying to disappear. I squeezed it hard. My arms shook under its weak, fierce resistance. In my chest, something snapped into place, a reflex I hadn't known I owned. Whatever it wanted, I would not let it die here. Not like this. And right then, in the middle of panic, I started to run. Away from the ash smell of death. Toward town. Toward the cold, fluorescent light of the veterinary clinic a few miles away. My gasping breaths blended with the pup's faint moans into a single ragged song. A song of desperation threaded with the thinnest hope. I refused to think beyond the next step. I didn't know if it would live. But I knew one thing. If there was even a sliver of a chance, I had to carry it to where life might be held. With each pounding stride, each bead of sweat that hit my shirt, a whisper chased me through my head. Don't abandon it. Don't let it die like this. The glass door of Redwood Animal Clinic swung open under a force that felt like pure desperation. I stumbled inside, clothes streaked with dust, sweat streaming down my back, a trembling Doberman puppy clutched to my chest. The cold scent of antiseptic flooded my lungs, so different from the burnt fur and ash outside. The abrupt change in air made my heart pound harder, but I knew I'd reached the only place left that might hold on to him. "Please! Help him!" I nearly shouted, my voice hoarse. The young woman at the reception desk shot up, her phone clattering onto the counter. Her eyes widened in shock at the small, quivering body pressed tight in my arms. From behind the swinging door, a figure appeared. A woman in her mid-40s, navy scrub top, eyes sharp yet warm. Stitched above her chest, Dr. Karen Whitaker. One glance and she had the whole picture, a frantic man, a convulsing puppy, the smell of scorched skin hanging in the air. "Bring him back here," she said, voice steady, no tremor at all. The sound of it dropped like an anchor into my panic. My legs shook as I followed her. The clinic was small, the fluorescent lights bright and cold, the tang of medical alcohol thick. I set him on the steel table. His little body curled instantly, quivering into a tight ball. I swallowed hard, trying to explain. I found him. He was walking into the ashes, on purpose. He kept going back. Dr. Whitaker didn't frown, didn't doubt. She just nodded, as if what I'd seen wasn't beyond imagining. Her hands moved, swift but gentle. She examined each tiny paw, the blistered skin, the red flesh, then reached for cooling ointment. "Second-degree burns," she murmured. "But paw pads are resilient." "He'll heal," those words should have made me exhale, but the moment the medicine touched him, the puppy jolted upright, gnawing at his own flank, scratching violently, eyes gone wild at some invisible terror. I stared, stunned. Why is he doing that? Why would he hurt himself? My voice cracked. Dr. Whitaker sighed, her hands never slowing, wrapping each paw in fresh white gauze. That exhale, heavy, seasoned, carried 1,000 sad stories she'd seen before. "What you're witnessing," she said, her voice low and steady, "isn't madness. It's trauma. Acute trauma. Severe depression in one so young can twist their instincts. They don't know words. They only know feelings. And when their world shatters, the drive to survive can turn upside down." Each word cut into me like a blade. Depression, trauma, in a puppy not yet 3 months old. Unthinkable. And yet, looking at him trembling, eyes dark with despair, I knew she was right. She stroked his head with one hand while holding the bandage in place with the other. Her tone dropped even lower, as if afraid the walls themselves might echo it back. "We've seen this before. When a puppy loses everything, when its world ends before it even begins, this is how grief speaks. They seek pain, because pain is louder than silence." I sank onto a plastic chair in the corner, my head spinning. A wave rose inside me. Panic mingled with a rage at some brutal truth I hadn't yet named. Looking at him, paws swaddled in white, body no bigger than a rolled towel, eyes still wet. I saw it clearly. The pain had a name, and it was lying right in front of me. My fingers dug into my palms. My heart drummed with the smell of alcohol, ointment, and the fragile breath of that life on the table. All of it fused into a single living song, the sound of pain given shape and voice. And now it was in my hands. Dr. Whitaker worked in silence now, only the soft rip of gauze and the pup's ragged breathing filling the room. I sat there, mind spinning, fingers clenched white. When the final bandage wrapped over the tiny paws, she lifted her head, her eyes thoughtful. "Next step," she murmured. "We need to scan for a microchip. Sometimes cases like this, they have a history." I nodded, throat dry. Watching her pull out the handheld reader, a strange feeling crept over me, part hope, part dread. If there was a chip, there would be a name, a story, a family. But another voice whispered inside, "What you're about to hear might be worse than anything you've imagined." She pressed the scanner to the back of his neck. A soft beep sliced through the heavy air. I held my breath. Dr. Whitaker looked at the number that appeared, typing quickly. Seconds passed. Her hands slowed, then stopped. She stared at the screen longer than necessary. "Is something wrong?" My own voice sounded like a frayed string about to snap. She turned the monitor slightly, her tone dropping. "His name is Shadow." He belonged to the Caldwell family. Husband, wife, 2 young children. She paused, inhaled deeply, then spoke again, low but heavy as stone. "According to the state database, the Caldwells were killed in a rollover accident on Highway 281, 3 weeks ago." The small room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing inward. I couldn't swallow. My eyes slid to the small body curled into a trembling knot on the steel table. A fragile life, everything ripped away in one violent moment of tires and shattering glass. Dr. Whitaker's eyes held a sorrow I'd never seen in anyone. He's the only survivor. I sat frozen, heart sinking like a stone dropped into my chest. The grim puzzle pieces fit together. The drive into the ashes, the mournful cries, the desperate pull toward pain. All of it rooted in one truth. He had no pack, no family, no warmth left. In my mind came phantom sounds, tires screaming on wet pavement, glass exploding, the shriek of a child. And in the chaos, a puppy survives. But his soul is permanently fractured. I looked down at Shadow, his eyes barely open, gaze weary, bottomless, carrying a sorrow no creature should bear. He didn't know the word accident. He didn't understand death. He only knew he had been thrown into a silent world where every laugh, every familiar hand had vanished. And in that silence, he chose fire to make it stop. My nails dug into my palms. He lost everyone, I whispered, half question, half confession. Dr. Whitaker placed a hand on my shoulder. Listen to me. What you saw out there, it wasn't madness. A dog's bond with his family is everything. It's his pack, his safety, his identity. When that bond is ripped away, sometimes their instinct breaks. What he did wasn't a death wish, the way we think of it. It was a cry for help. The only language he had, I looked at Shadow. For a brief moment, his eyes met mine, a trembling, fragile glance, as if asking one question only. Are you going to leave me too? That question hung between us, silent and merciless. And I knew, from that second on, I wasn't standing on the outside anymore. I had stepped fully into his story with no way back. I sat in silence in the small room, the hum of the air conditioner above mixing with Shadow's thin, uneven breaths. Dr. Whitaker's words still echoed. He's the only survivor. Each syllable cut into my mind like a blade. I looked down at my hands, at the trembling puppy whose tiny paws were swaddled in white. Those dark eyes stared back at me, and inside them was a question never spoken. Are you going to leave me too? I swallowed hard, bent close and whispered, my voice hoarse but steady. No. I won't. Whatever it takes, I'm not leaving you. The words didn't come like a thought. They came like a vow pulled from bone and marrow. In that moment, I knew my fate had just been bound to his. That night, I carried Shadow back to the small rented cabin on the edge of town. I'd made a little nest of soft towels in the corner of my bedroom, thinking that after the day's horror, he would finally sleep in peace. But the moment the light went off, reality struck like a hammer. The sound of claws scratching on the wooden floor filled the darkness. Shadow wouldn't lie still. He paced in circles, his steps clicking in a relentless rhythm that tightened my chest. Every so often, he'd stop at the door, lift his head, and let out a long, low moan, so deep and sorrowful it ripped the night open. It wasn't hunger. It wasn't a bathroom need. It was the cry of a soul calling for people who would never come back. I lay in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, throat knotted. Every sound was another cut to the heart. I couldn't take it. I got up and went to him. In the dim glow of the night lamp, I saw that thin body shaking in waves. I sank down on the floor beside him, back against the wall, and gently laid my hand on his back. At first he flinched, but then he let me. I whispered over and over, not caring what I said. Nonsense syllables like a rhythm, a lullaby. I wanted him to know one thing. He was no longer alone in this room. but my words didn't seem to reach the deepest place inside him. Each time Shadow began to drift off, his whole body would jolt violently. A sharp yelp, then he'd spring up, eyes wild, running in frantic circles as if the crash had just happened again. He was trapped in an endless nightmare loop. I sat there, helpless, my heart sinking. I had promised not to abandon him, but now I wondered, am I strong enough? The night stretched on without end. The clock struck 3 a.m. I was still on the floor, my hand on his back like the only anchor in a storm. My eyelids felt like lead, but I didn't dare close them. If I lost focus, I feared he might do something reckless. In that moment, I understood. What I'd begun wasn't simply raising a puppy. This was an attempt to save a shattered soul. I had stepped into a place of nightmares, where a being far too small carried pain far too large. And from this moment, I could not turn away. Dawn crept in, the first sunlight seeping through the blinds. I looked at Shadow curled in the corner, still letting out small, broken whimpers. My body was spent, but a new resolve burned low inside me. I didn't know how I would do it, but I knew one thing. The vow I'd made last night couldn't be broken. No matter how many sleepless nights it cost, I would not abandon him. Not ever. I sat in silence in the small room, the hum of the air conditioner above mixing with Shadow's thin, uneven breaths. Dr. Whitaker's words still echoed. He's the only survivor. Each syllable cut into my mind like a blade. I looked down at my hands, at the trembling puppy whose tiny paws were swaddled in white. Those dark eyes stared back at me, and inside them was a question never spoken. Are you going to leave me too? I swallowed hard, bent close and whispered, my voice hoarse but steady. No. I won't. Whatever it takes, I'm not leaving you. The words didn't come like a thought. They came like a vow pulled from bone and marrow. In that moment, I knew my fate had just been bound to his. That night, I carried Shadow back to the small rented cabin on the edge of town. I'd made a little nest of soft towels in the corner of my bedroom, thinking that after the day's horror, he would finally sleep in peace. But the moment the light went off, reality struck like a hammer. The sound of claws scratching on the wooden floor filled the darkness. Shadow wouldn't lie still. He paced in circles, his steps clicking in a relentless rhythm that tightened my chest. Every so often, he'd stop at the door, lift his head, and let out a long, low moan, so deep and sorrowful it ripped the night open. It wasn't hunger. It wasn't a bathroom need. It was the cry of a soul calling for people who would never come back. I lay in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, throat knotted. Every sound was another cut to the heart. I couldn't take it. I got up and went to him. In the dim glow of the night lamp, I saw that thin body shaking in waves. I sank down on the floor beside him, back against the wall, and gently laid my hand on his back. At first, he flinched, but then he let me. I whispered over and over, not caring what I said. Nonsense syllables like a rhythm, a lullaby. I wanted him to know one thing. He was no longer alone in this room. But my words didn't seem to reach the deepest place inside him. Each time Shadow began to drift off, his whole body would jolt violently. A sharp yelp, then he'd spring up, eyes wild, running in frantic circles as if the crash had just happened again. He was trapped in an endless nightmare loop. I sat there, helpless, my heart sinking. I had promised not to abandon him, but now I wondered, am I strong enough? The night stretched on without end. The clock struck 3 a.m. I was still on the floor, my hand on his back like the only anchor in a storm. My eyelids felt like lead, but I didn't dare close them. If I lost focus, I feared he might do something reckless. In that moment, I understood. What I'd begun wasn't simply raising a puppy. This was an attempt to save a shattered soul. I had stepped into a place of nightmares, where a being far too small carried pain far too large. And from this moment, I could not turn away. Dawn crept in, the first sunlight seeping through the blinds. I looked at Shadow curled in the corner, still letting out small, broken whimpers. My body was spent, but a new resolve burned low inside me. I didn't know how I would do it. But I knew one thing. The vow I'd made last night couldn't be broken. No matter how many sleepless nights it cost, I would not abandon him. Not ever. I sat frozen in that small room, the hum of the air conditioner blending with Shadow's fragile breaths. Dr. Whitaker's words, "He's the only survivor," still echoed like a blade in my head. I looked at my hands, at the tiny paws wrapped in white, at those dark eyes holding a question they couldn't speak. "Are you going to leave me too?" I swallowed, bent down and whispered, voice rough but steady. "No, I won't. Whatever it takes, I'm not leaving you." The words came not as thought, but as a vow torn from marrow. In that instant, I knew my fate had bound itself to his. That night, I took Shadow back to the small wooden cabin I rented on the edge of town. I'd made a nest of soft towels in the bedroom corner, thinking he might finally drift into peace. But when the light went out, reality struck like a hammer. His claws scraped the floorboards in the dark. He wouldn't lie still. He paced in circles, the click of his steps a relentless drum that tightened my chest. Every so often he sat by the door, lifted his head, and let out a long, low moan so deep it tore the night open. It wasn't hunger. It wasn't a bathroom need. It was the cry of a soul calling for people who would never return. I lay staring at the ceiling, throat clenched. Each sound cut deeper. I couldn't stand it. I got up and went to him. In the dim lamp glow, his thin body shook in waves. I slid down to the floor beside him, back to the wall, hand resting on his back. At first he flinched, then stayed. I whispered without stopping. Nonsense words, just a rhythm. A lullaby. I wanted him to know he wasn't alone in this room. But the words couldn't seem to reach the deepest part of him. Each time Shadow's eyes closed, his body jolted hard. A sharp yelp, then he sprang up, eyes wild, circling as if the crash was happening again. He was caught in an endless nightmare. I sat there, helpless, heart heavy. I'd sworn not to abandon him, but now I wondered, am I strong enough? The night stretched on. At 3 a.m. I was still on the floor, my hand on his back like the only anchor in a storm. My eyelids sagged, but I didn't dare close them. If I let go, I feared he'd do something to hurt himself. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't about raising a puppy. It was about trying to rescue a broken soul. I had stepped into a place of nightmares, where something far too small carried pain far too large. And from here, there was no turning back. Dawn crept through the blinds. I looked at Shadow curled in the corner, still letting out small, broken whimpers. My body was spent, but a quiet resolve burned low inside. I didn't know how I'd do it, but I knew one thing. The vow I'd made couldn't be broken. No matter how many sleepless nights it cost, I would not abandon him. Not ever. A month had passed since the day I found Shadow in the ashes. It felt like a year. Time measured not in hours, but in small steps forward, in faint signals that a soul was learning how to crawl back from the edge. That afternoon, coming home from work, I slid the key into the lock and heard a sound I hadn't heard before. The soft thump of a tail against the wooden floor. I opened the door, and there, right at the entryway, stood Shadow. His bandaged paws were steadier now, and that tiny tail, for the first time, wagged, just once, when his eyes met mine. One small wag. But to me, it was a symphony. I dropped to my knees, arms open. Shadow hesitated for a heartbeat, then rushed forward and pressed his head into my chest. I held him tight, tears burning my eyes. He was no longer the puppy who walked into fire to forget. He was a living being choosing life, choosing me. I started with a small challenge, a stuffed squirrel with a squeaker inside. At first, Shadow avoided it as if it belonged to another world. But one night, as I sat on the floor, he crept over, nudged the toy with his nose, picked it up, and dropped it in front of me. His eyes shone with a glimmer I'd never seen before, the desire to play. I tossed it lightly. He bounded after it, awkward, but full of energy. When he brought it back, his tail wagged harder, and his eyes sparkled with joy. A laugh burst out of me, echoing through a house that had been silent for too long. A real laugh, not smothered by fear. In that instant, I realized I wasn't just saving Shadow. He was saving me. Of course, wounds don't vanish overnight. On stormy nights, he still crawled under the couch, body quaking. Loud noises still made him flinch. But unlike before, he didn't stay trapped inside the fear. Each time I sat down, hand on his back, the tremors eased. In the middle of his storms, I had become the anchor. One late evening, with Shadow asleep beside me on the sofa, I stroked the sleek black and tan fur that had grown back. His steady breathing matched my heartbeat. I looked up at the ceiling, and for the first time in years, a quiet peace spread through my chest. I had stepped into fire and gathered up a fading ember. Through patience, kindness, and the small order of each day, that ember had grown into a small, warm, steady flame. I whispered in his ear, a vow carved deep. You'll never face the storm alone again. Not while I'm here. Shadow stirred, pressing his head deeper into my lap. And I knew, from this day forward, not only had he been saved, but I had been led out of my own darkness. Two fractured souls had found each other, and in that refuge, both were healing. Have you ever had a moment when a small creature looked at you with trembling eyes that seemed to ask, "Will you leave me too?" I saw that question in Shadow's gaze, and from that moment my life changed. That first night, I thought I'd collapse. But little by little I learned. What a broken soul needs isn't pity. It needs a steady harbor, a world with order, a hand that doesn't pull away at its most fragile moment. Shadow didn't just learn how to live again. He taught me that love isn't a passing feeling, it's patience over time, a promise kept each day, even on the darkest nights. And now, as I watch him sleeping beside me, I wonder, maybe this isn't only the story of how I rescued him. Maybe he is the lighthouse that pulled me out of the lonely waters I never dared to name. What about you? Have you ever saved a small life? A dog, a cat, even a bird trembling in a storm? And did it change you? If so, share your story in the comments. Compassion never stops at one act. It spreads, touching other hearts. And if you believe, as I do, that no one should face the storm alone, help carry that message forward. Shadow found his harbor. And maybe, because of you, another life will too.